Welcome back to another PGMMV tutorial. Today's video is going to go over how to easily implement cutscenes into your game, and it's going to remind you a lot of how RPG Maker will do cutscenes, which is by far the easiest engine to do cutscenes in. And so with that said, let's get started. All right, so here's the scene setup, and the player is going to be controlling the player, and then when he hits this area right here, which is going to be an area detection of 101, and I'm representing it by the tile, by the mushroom tiles here. Now, once he hits this area detection, he's going to be executed into a cutscene. So the player will lose control and he will walk up to this NPC right here. This NPC will give him a decision, so we'll have choices in here. And if you choose no, then you can walk around again, and then you can talk to her again. And if you choose yes in either case, you'll then be you'll then start the cutscene, which is going to be going down, grabbing this key, giving it back to her, and then she'll have a little ending thing before the player can then control again. So this is going to be a cutscene that is using multiple motions for the player. For instance, the player is going to have to walk. It's going to do a little pickup thing, and it's going to have a little ending pose, well, more like an ending death. But so we're going to be changing the player's animation the whole time very easily. All right, I'll show you just how easy this is. So the first thing that we have to set up is we have to have a database for this, okay? And this sample project will be on my itch import page, so feel free to download it and browse around. But the thing is that we need all possible motions that can be used in a cutscene. For instance, I have P cutscene motions, player cutscene motions. And right here, all you got to do is you add a database and make sure that you select 4 objects, okay? If you select 4 objects, it's going to give you this option, motion. All right, it's also going to give you another one by default, but I just went ahead and deleted it because we only need the motions for these cutscenes. And so right here we have, I'm just naming the row idle, and then I'm naming the motion idle. Now the important thing is that these names are consistent with the animation motion names. For instance, if I name this one idle, and then I go back to the database and I name this one wait, for instance, it will not work. It has to be the exact same name as the motion. And so you can see I have a walk, I have an item, which is more like an item pickup, but item for short, and then a dead. All right. And these are all representing these. So now that I have this data, I don't really have to go into the object here, because you'll see that I only have one cutscene action. I don't need to go into this and have a idle cutscene. And this is very similar to what we've seen before, where you have an idle representing the idle motion. And then this one would be representing the walk motion. And then you would change this one to walk. And so you would just have basically blocks of every kind of motion that you would need. All right, this is kind of the standard way of doing it right now. Well, we don't need those anymore. We just need one action. And we can just simply call it cutscene, so that we know that if this player is in cutscene, we're controlling everything. The other important thing is that we take away the movement input by clicking this and ignore direction change by clicking this. And as long as we have these checked, this is a true cutscene or action where the player cannot control anything. All right, so now how do we control a cutscene? Well, controlling the cutscene is similar in RPG Maker as your event would control almost everything, right? You would have one event that basically controlled the entire cutscene. You would change animations, you would set move directions and everything from that one event. So you still have to have a controller for the cutscene. And so I've just named this NPC cutscene control just for easy recognition that this is the one that is controlling the entire cutscene. All right, so before we actually get in the cutscene, the easiest way to implement this is by going to the plugins and adding show message and show choices. Now I have videos on how to use both of these. I also have videos on how to customize like the colors of the highlighter and stuff like this. And also how to customize your image. You don't have to use the default at all. So this video will not cover those things. Go watch those other videos if you want to know how to more customize them. But these are just the easiest way to get messages and to get choices into your game. All right, so once you have those installed, then we can come back to our NPC controller, for instance. And the first thing is that we're waiting for the cutscene to trigger. Now, what did I use as the trigger? I simply used area detection. All right, I used area detection 101. Now, what is area detection real quick? You can go to your tiles right here. You can click on a tile. This is that red mushroom that I was saying I'm using on the area detection tab right here. And you can see that I click on the red mushroom, I go over here, and I see that I've assigned area detection to be 101. And then this is important right here, is that when target overlaps the tile. All right. And it's affecting the player group. I didn't need any collisions or anything. And then we can go on the scene, and I made a layer that is to the far right. All right. The far right means that it's the lowest possible, because we can see that if I click on this layer, we have all the ground. So I knew that this mushroom tile is going to show underneath the ground tile. And so that's why we don't see it when we play the game. See, if we test the game right now, we can see that we do not see the mushrooms. All right. Let me put this down lower here. There we go. And so yeah, that's what area detection is doing. And just real quickly, just in case you weren't aware, area detection is solely based off the center, this little red dot right here. Okay. And if you don't know how to change the center, you change it right here. You can see that as I go like this, the center moves. This is what is determining whether you're in that area. So if the player moves in this area, as soon as the center, that red dot, touches inside this tile, it will then trigger this area detection. All right. And this will become true, and then it will go to this next action. That's a little bit about how it's working. All right. So now we go to this where the player hits area detection 101, and we have a couple choices. You can see that I'm using the choice selected link, which is very easy to use. You just simply click other conditions, go to choice selected, and you can choose all the choices or canceled. So this one is if you choose choice 2. This one is if you choose choice 1. If we go into here and go to our show choices, you can see choice 1 is yes, choice 2 is no. So that makes sense. But let's see what else we're doing. So this is where it gets important. This is where it gets more like RPG Maker. All right. So the first thing that we do is that we execute the player into the cutscene. All right. So execute object action, the player into the cutscene. The next thing that we do is we want to move the player into position. So what you can easily do is use move object, make sure that you're selecting the player. You can match the display direction if you need to, but the important thing is that you set a duration. All right. So you want this to happen within a certain amount of time, because we need to control the time. So setting the time right here is important, actually. And then the next thing is that how do you want to move? Do you want to move to a particular object or to coordinates? And so 300 and 160 was the coordinate. Easily how I got that is I just went to scene and I said I want the player about right here. And then down in the bottom corner right here, you can see that about 300, and then I went down a little bit to 160. And I said that's where I want it to go. So then I plugged in those numbers right there. And now the object moves easily up to there. The next thing is that when we go to the cutscene, all right, so when we first execute into the cutscene, we see that we're in the idle motion. So for instance, if I play test here, we can see though that as soon as I start walking up, I am walking. So how does that work? And that's where the database comes in. So as soon as we start the movement, we then instantly apply the database to the desired motion that we want. So we select from the database list player cutscene motions, we do the name of walk, and then we put it onto the player. All right. And then we say, okay. And that is what changes that motion to walk, even though the player is in a cutscene action with the default motion of idle. So we can literally change the motions now in between with the database. That's where this gets really powerful. All right. So then the next thing that I do is I provide a wait. Now these waits are going to differentiate depending on how long you need. But basically I sat and watched the movement, and I watched about how long I needed that movement to last. So I found that 1.6 seconds was enough time to make it look like it was walking and then stopped. So then after the 1.6, then the player is going to be stopped. So now we need to put the player's motion back into idle, right? And that's exactly what I do. And then we show another message, which is, will you help me? And that's when she asks that thing. If you say, or actually, once you click OK, which is spacebar in the sample project, then it will go to show choices, which you will then have an option yes or no. Now, depending if you say no, then it's going to execute the player back into idle. So the cutscene is technically done for now. Okay, put him back in idle. And then you'll have an option again where if you are both, when you press OK and you're in the distance but of less than 96, the player, and it can only be in the down direction, so you have to be kind of underneath her. Then you can trigger this again, and it does the same thing where it executes to cutscene. It shows that same thing, will you help me? And then gives the choice again. If you choose no again, it's just like a loop right here. If you choose yes, then in both cases, we'll go to yes, get the key return. All right. And so we can see this right now. If we go up here and play test, and it asks, will you help me? We get a choice, and I'm going to say no. And then we can free roam around. You'll also notice that this doesn't trigger anymore. And the reason why is because we're in a different trigger. We're in this action right now, and the trigger is not the same. It's now we have to press OK and be underneath. So if I walk back up and talk to her, then I get that same message again. I can say no again, and I can do this as many times as I want. Okay, so now let's go into what happens when you say yes. All right, so this is a little longer one, and you'll notice that I have these spaced a little different, and I'll show you why, and I'll show you exactly one benefit of it. So here we go. So if you say yes, then you're going to go get the key and you're going to return it. That's what this action is focused on. And you can see that there's a lot going on. So the first thing that we do is we say, okay, great, go get the key, it's to the left. And the cool thing about show message, and the reason why this is so powerful, is that once you're in a show message, it pauses this entire action, meaning that the logic stops right here. And then when you clear that message by pressing space, then it continues, and it will continue. It will wait right here, and then it will continue, wait right here, and it will continue. And each corresponding message, for instance, in this one where we had, let's see, no, that was 2 messages. Well, let's just say that you had 2 messages. I'll just set one up right here. So let's say that we had a message, move object, and then a message. So we'll show the message, and it will pause right here. When you click space to end the message, it then goes to move object, and then goes to show message, and pauses right here again. So you can use these show messages as like a quick pause in a way. Okay, so now we have the get key return. So, whoops, there we go. All right, so it says thank you, says that the key's to the left. So then we're going to move to the key. So in this case, I just chose choose to specific object, the key. I chose 3 seconds, the player, and I chose match direction. Then, in order to get the motion to be the correct walking, we had to change with the database to the walk motion for the player. Then we do the timing, which it took about 2.4 seconds. I noticed that if you do 1 second for every second you do on this duration time, it seems to actually be like 1.8 seconds according to wait time. So you might keep that in mind. It might be a little easier to do math or something like this, but I really found just you will have to change the wait different to what this. I don't know if it's because we're running other runtimes ahead of it or something gets out of sync a little bit, but anyway, it wasn't that hard. I just minus 0.2 per second, and it seemed to be about right. But anyway, so we change the idle to walk. We wait 2.4 seconds to give us that 3-second walk time. And then we apply the database again to be in the idle. And the reason I did this was to just give a brief wait of 0.5. Like I didn't want to instantly go into the next action. I wanted to give a brief wait that the player walked to that area. And then we're going to change the database to do the item pickup motion. Because remember, the whole time this player is in cutscene, and we're just changing the motion through the database. All right, so we change to the item pickup motion. We execute the key to the pickup action. So again, we're controlling this all from one object, but the key's got a little pickup thing, which will move it up a little bit, and then it will destroy after so much time. So in the control here, we have the let's see here. The key right here goes to the pickup state. We wait that 0.75 seconds that it takes for the key to destroy itself. And then we start to move back to that original position of 300 and 160, again with 3 seconds, again matching display. And then, of course, when we're moving, we want to show the walk motion. I'm sure by now everything is making sense on how easily this is to get this. And you could do this for many objects. Say you had another NPC and you wanted them to meet and talk for a little bit. You could control it all from within the object, or from within the cutscene control now. You can control everything, the movements, the motions, everything. All right. It's also important, or one thing is it's sort of important to name stuff the same. For instance, for like this database right here where we have idle and walk, if you have every NPC with idle and walk, then you could literally use the player cutscene motions as well on those NPCs. You would just apply it. For instance, when you go to apply the database, right, you would just select a different object to apply it to. But because they have an idle and a walk motion, if every object has the same name, then you would be able to use it. So I would try to stick to a very usable naming convention. All right, so after the key's picked up, we move back, we start the walk. After so much time, I found that 2.6 seconds was needed on the way back. Then we go to idle, and then this is just a traditional face direction where I change the direction display variable to 0, which is facing up. And now here's where I did something different. Here's where, so now you joke hurt the player. Now I could have easily just had all of this still in this action. But what I wanted to show here is that if you are using weights in this action, you have to, and say you wanted to go to another action, the only way that you can do it is with an execute object action in this case. All right, so what I just wanted to show here is that if you ever have a situation where you want to go into another action, but you have weights like this in here, then you're going to have to use execute object action. You can see it, execute object action of the self, and it goes to joke hurt player. So it just goes to the next action. We just had to do it via execute object action. All right, so once we're in the joke hurt, we run another message here that says, okay, now I will hurt you. We wait a little bit. We screen shake. Again, this was just to show that this is where your juice could go also. All your sound effects, your, say you have message sound effects, you could have them at the beginning and end of each show message. I didn't put sound effects. I didn't want to make this file too big, so I just deleted everything. But this is a screen shake, for instance. So we screen shake it, and then we apply the motion of dead. And then we wait for a couple seconds, and then we just get a little, just kidding, thank you. And then it faces the player downward, and then it executes its object self into the done cutscene right here, which is then where you execute the player back to idle. And this white dots is just a link so that I know that this white for me represents execute object action when I'm in my projects. So if I have a polka dot or a dotted line with white, that means that I'm executing object action at the end of this into this next action. That's just a simple thing that I do so I could visually from outside know what's going on here. All right, and simply it just looks like this. I'll just show the whole cutscene here. So it walks up, right? Will you help me? And you say, yes, thank you. My key is to the left. Please bring it back. So you'll go, you'll get the key pops up, and then you go back. And she even changes the animation, because you'll notice that in the joke hurt, I changed animation. This is another reason why where you'd want to use a different action to represent the rest of the animate or the cutscene is if you have this animation that you want to change. Then he gets hurt, waits a couple seconds, just kidding, thank you, and then boom, pops you back and you can walk again. Then I added another thing where it's a remaining after talk where it just says thank you, and it just keeps saying thank you, and you can walk around. All right. So you could, just real quick, you could easily still have this in the same action, and you could change this object via database as well within that action too. So you didn't need this. I just, sometimes when these things get too big and you're having to scroll down a lot, it is just easier to separate them. In RPG Maker, this is a lot like, for instance, in a cutscene sense, it's a lot like having different event pages for your different cutscene parts. You could think of it like that as well. But yeah, this is a very simple way to do a cutscene. It's thorough. It is able to have all the control of the cutscene in one object, which is insanely important. And it was one thing that was missing before the database. Before the database, we didn't have an option. We didn't have a method really to keep the complete full structure all in one object. We couldn't do it because we still had to have multiple actions to represent the animations that we would need, and we would have to keep throwing the player or the other objects into that one thing. Now, in the control now, all we have to do now is we have to make sure that every object that we want is in their own cutscene action. So we do have to do that. There is a little prep. And then we just have to make sure that when we're done, that all those objects are in the desired object as well. And that's it. Just the start and the finish. And that's how easy it is. So with that said, if there's any questions, comments below, Steam forums, we'll get you figured out. And with that said, we'll see you at the next video.